A huge drop in the stock markets today, 5% of the S&P. And it's very worrisome. It's not the greatest drop. I believe it's directly related to the fact that the bill that Obama and his minions pushed through was seen by Wall Street for what it is. It's the plundering of the American people. The other day I read an article written by the great representative from Texas, Ron Paul. He made more sense to me than anybody else. Congressman Ron Paul wrote this. He said, the cuts that they were discussing are illusory, and they're not really cuts. And he said it was akin to a family so-called saving $100,000 in expenses by deciding not to buy a Lamborghini and instead getting a fully loaded Mercedes when really their budget dictates that they need to stick with their perfectly serviceable Honda. Look, today, B of A down 7.4%, JP Morgan Chase down 4.9%, Citigroup down 6.58%, Wells Fargo down 5.7%. These are all financial stocks, and many of these benefited from TARP and some of the other bailout instruments. So why do you suppose they were hit so hard all of a sudden? Is it because they're in trouble again?
We expect the unemployment rate to continue to decline, but the pace of progress remains frustratingly slow.
Chairman Ben Bernanke telling us what we already know. Today, the Fed acknowledging disappointing growth, higher inflation, weakening labor market, but insisting the so-called soft patch is only temporary. The Fed also still planning to end its QE2 money printing program at the end of the month. This, as another report shows, the U.S. economy deteriorating over the next 25 years without significant action. The Congressional Budget Office now predicting U.S. debt on schedule to 190% of our GDP by 2035.
This whole fabulous exercise in money printing, QE1, QE2, the zero interest rates, has been a calamity of historic proportions. The only thing it did, it brought a huge windfall of speculative gains, literally tens of billions to Park Avenue, and left Main Street high and dry.
I mean, this all happened under Bernanke. Look, go back to Bernanke, 2007, November. He's telling Congress there is no recession in sight. In December, they officially say we're in a recession. He's been off on everything. He's no genius.
I predicted this collapse. It's going exactly the way I wrote. And what I also predicted is that the government was going to take actions like this to try to stop the collapse from happening. And that these government cures were going to be worse than the government disease. And we're going to end up dying not from the disease, but from their cure.
Now, what did Bernanke do over the last 2 years? He tried to drive zero rates to negative, thinking that we just need to borrow some more money, stimulate some more credit, and you can solve this problem. That's backwards.
He admitted that he hated, and he used that word, hated, bailing out the banks, but it had to be done. What's your reaction to this?
You tell the lie over and over again until the lie becomes the truth. There is absolutely no evidence that if any of these financial firms failed, the world would have collapsed. What would have happened is that capitalism would have worked the way it was supposed to, and that meant that the healthy banks, the smaller banks, the commercial banks, the banks that didn't gamble would have picked up the slack.
Remember, if it wasn't for the Federal Reserve, which is a government entity, keeping interest rates much too low, we never would have had a housing bubble. We never would have had a subprime market. We wouldn't have had teaser rates. If it wasn't for Freddie and Fannie, which were creatures of government, we wouldn't have had the moral hazards necessary to allow Americans to borrow more money than they can repay.
And we have gone in exactly the wrong direction for 2 years now, and the Fed is only making it worse in a Keynesian economics that just says print debt and somehow prosperity will return.
If we discovered that space aliens were planning to attack and we needed a massive buildup to counter the space alien threat, this slump would be over in 18 months. There was a Twilight Zone episode like this.
Keynesians are to economics what witch doctors are to medicine.
Jim, of course, a legendary investor. Jim, can I start off by asking you why you think the equity markets are not responding to the stabilization plans that are being introduced around the world at the moment?
Because they're absurd. Jeff, we have people... If I had come on your show every week for 100 weeks in a row and everything I said to you was wrong, would you keep me on your show? Would you have any confidence in me? Would you listen to me? Mr. Paulson, Mr. Bernanke, and the guy at the New York Fed, Tim somebody, every week they have been dead wrong. Why would you listen to them? I wouldn't listen to them.
Are you backing anyone in next year's U.S. presidential election? If Ron Paul gets anywhere near the nomination, I will certainly support him. I mean, He's the only one that I've seen in American politics that seems to have a clue.
Do you, do you see anybody in the political arena who is, who gives you hope or who seems to get what you're talking about?
I think the heart of the problem is our monetary system is out of control. There's only one guy who understands it. It's Ron Paul.
Who do you look to, if anyone, in Washington, D.C. to execute what you're suggesting? I mean, is it the Democrats? Is it the Republicans? Or are you saying that everyone's sort of out of touch here and in bed with Wall Street?
The only one that, to me, seems to have a firm grip on all of this is Ron Paul.
I supported Ron Paul. I mean, he was the only guy that was actually saying anything that was truly different.
Ron Paul makes a lot of sense, and more people ought to listen to him. The Texas congressman has visionary ideas about where the country ought to be going and what sea changes are necessary in order for the U.S. to continue being a superpower. When Ron Paul ran for the Republican nomination in 2008, he talked about the economy imploding, the untenable nature of the national debt, the eventual destruction of our currency, and a limited role for government.
Today, this country is in the middle of a recession for a lot of people. Michigan knows about it. Poor people know about it. The middle class knows about it. Wall Street doesn't know about it. Washington, D.C. doesn't know about it. But it's because of the monetary system and the excessive spending.
No one can deny how ahead of the curve you were on all of this stuff, and I admire anyone who risks a great deal of wrath doing that sort of stuff.
Does the Federal Reserve contribute to the business cycle?
It has. It has in times.
Does excessive credit and low interest rate cause malinvestment? Artificially low interest rates?
We could make mistakes and put the interest rate at the wrong place, and that would have negative impacts. I agree.
And someday we may try the market to determine the interest rates. Thank you.
A lot of the things Ron Paul warned us about have happened. We're deeper in debt, a lot deeper. The dollar is worth quite a bit less. The federal government increasingly dysfunctional, and the country is more divided maybe than at any time since the Civil War.
What would be your jobs plan?
Repeal about 70 years of bad economic policy, which isn't all that easy because we follow Keynesian economics, and Keynesian economics teaches that you need to spend more money. No matter how much debt the people are in debt and the government's in debt, they advocate just more spending. So you have to reverse that concept.
So I think it's much better to bite the bullet and say we've lived beyond our means, we ought to live within our means, we ought to have a sound currency and balanced budget. We need to have a system where we invite capital back into this country.
Why should the politicians be able to spend at will and then just print money when they need it, and then they wonder why we get into trouble? So yes, we have to take the Fed on because it does cause the business cycle. If you want to understand recessions and depression, you have to understand the Federal Reserve System.
What do you think of Ben Bernanke? He's doing as good a job as he thinks he can do in the Federal Reserve. But look, I'm not going to spend my time going after Ben Bernanke. I'm not going to take my effort and focus on the Federal Reserve.
But the falling dollar is absolutely crucial to many of the things that ail us. You know, the consumer price index is jumping. People are furious at the rise in gasoline.
No question. The Federal Reserve. I'll take a pass on the Federal Reserve right at the moment, to be real honest with you.
You were a Fed chairman?
Yes, I was chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City.
Are you for or against auditing the Fed?
It's not going to be an issue that I'm going to carry the water on because I don't believe they're going to find anything.
We found out in the bailout, the Fed was involved with $15 trillion passing out to their buddies, 1/3 of it going to foreign banks. I mean, this is such an outrage. It's bigger than the Congress itself.
In just a few minutes, the Republican candidates for president will square off in a Fox News debate in Iowa. Compared to President Obama, each one of these folks would be an improvement. But an improvement is not enough. Ron Paul is the only candidate in the Republican race who has served in the federal government and not succumbed to the debt disease, and who has consistently voted to force the government to live within its means. If we elect a small government candidate in 2012, we may get out of this mess. If we don't, we won't. As you watch this debate tonight, look for the candidate who will upset the status quo, not just modify it slightly.
Welcome to the Orange County Convention Center in Orlando, Florida, the site of our Republican presidential debate. Now a question for all of the candidates. How are you going to turn this country around? Mr. King.
But what Americans are looking for in order to build that confidence is leadership.
Governor Romney.
We are a patriotic people.
Governor Perry.
Energy independent, and that is the way you get America working again.
Congressman Paul.
I've been arguing this case for 20 years and warning about bubbles and housing bubbles and NASDAQ bubbles, and a lot of other economists have been doing the same thing. Until we understand that, you can't solve the problem. You have to deal with the Federal Reserve System, you have to deal with free markets, and you have to deal with the tax program and the regulatory system. Then you can get your jobs, because the people will create the jobs, not the government.
Waiting for the applause.